Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome back Dr. Hayley Cawthra. She's spoken to us a few times before on some very interesting subjects, particularly around Walker Bay and the Kelder areas and her research along the southern coast of South Africa. Hayley is a senior scientist in the geophysics unit of the Council of Geoscience and a research associate at the Nelson Mandela University in the African Center for Coastal Paleoscience. She holds a PhD in geology from the University of Cape Town and has research interests in marine geophysics. Quaternary sea level change, human use of ancient coastlines, and the emergence of paleoenvironments through changing climate regimes on continental shelves are some of the things that she has studied and has written many authoritative papers on these subjects. Hayley, thank you very much for joining us on Zoom again. We're looking forward to another fascinating presentation on your research.
So thank you so much for having me again. It's really a pleasure to be able to spend this morning with you. Usually we're down in the Cape, as Gert mentioned, but this morning we're going to head northeast up to the Wild Coast. Yeah, across Southern Africa, there are a few places with narrow and steep continental margins, like this one on the east coast, that restrict coastline movements and promote relative coastal stability back through glacial periods when sea levels were low. If you compare it on this map to the Cape, you'll see that that's quite profoundly narrow up there. Mpondoland on our Indian Ocean or Wild Coast, I'm sure most of you have been there, is one of those places. With a shelf of maximally about 8 or 9 kilometers wide, archaeological sites that are now on the modern coast would have always been within a daily foraging radius of hunter-gatherers during glacial periods when sea levels were low. This is important because ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers have shown that their daily foraging radii are always within about 15 kilometers. So climatic and environmental changes across Pleistocene, glacial and interglacial periods, sea level curve shown down here at the bottom, globally have caused shifts in habitats out onto what's now the continental shelf during times of low sea level. And this then impacts on the availability of plant, animal, freshwater resources, which hunter-gatherers very closely depend on, of course. And these changes then likely influence their annual and seasonal mobility, as well as their resource decision-making and behavior, etc. So our overarching questions in this project are: what happened in this area during the Pleistocene compared to what we know about the Cape? And how did hunter-gatherers behave in a coastal context through this time where the sea was never too far away? So no archaeological work has been done on this specific part of the coast since about 1950, where it was sort of deemed unpromising for anything older than about the Iron Age. Coupled with the difficulty in access and, of course, political issues over those years, it was largely ignored by sort of Cortonary scientists. But in 2011, we went exploring this landscape because it ticked various boxes of what we were hoping to find. And that was evidence of coastal foraging going back to the last glacial maximum about 20,000 years ago. So some reasons that we chose this area and thought it would be favorable were the narrow continental shelf that I've already mentioned, the Agulhas currents, rich intertidal resources, abundant freshwater resources like this Mkweni River shown here, abundant terrestrial resources from animals and vegetation. There are detailed ethnobotanical records from plants in this area that can be detected archaeologically that I'll show you later. And then, of course, the actual possibility for rock shelters because of the coastal exposures of these Mthikaba Formation sandstones. So the offshore, the warm water of the Agulhas currents flows very close to this coast. And this influences marine habitats by stabilizing inshore water temperature, which supports intertidal and littoral fish and shellfish communities. The current also drives the convection of humid coastal air cells, which would enhance precipitation. And some paleoclimate studies have shown that it was relatively consistent, probably through the glacial periods of the Pleistocene. There are diverse environments on the landscape in this area, including open grassland habitats, or the sourveld grasses as they're called, coastal closed canopy forest habitats, riverine habitats, and coastlines and marine environments too. basically we found the narrow shelf and the sort of favorable environment that we were looking for. And this picture, I like to show it. It just shows that, so firstly, the last glacial maximum shoreline and the shelf break on this coast lie at the same sort of position, which is about 130 meters below present sea level. Ships that are clearly visible from the shoreline tend to follow this shelf break, especially if they're heading south. They follow the Agulhas Current. And this demonstrates that standing on the modern coast right now, you can see that position out there 8 kilometers away. And the implication is that in the past, if hunter-gatherers were living on what's now the Neo coast, they would have always been within visible and achievable range of that Paleo coast. So we established a formal project about 10 years ago, led by Eric Fisher, who's shown here on the left, but it's co-led by all four of us. Eric is the PI, or the principal investigator, and his specialization is in archaeoinformatics. So basically taking archaeology into a GIS context and sort of bringing everything together. I'll show you some beautiful footage and videos later, and these are Eric's work. He does all this sort of 3D rendering and that sort of thing. Then Irene Esteban is a paleobotanist, and her specialization is in phytoliths, but she's responsible for all the paleo-environmental work on our project. Justin Pargeter, who's South African born, but he lives in the US. He's a lithics specialist, so he leads the work on the stone tools and the implications for behavior. And then I do geology, sedimentology, geophysics, all of that work across the landscape and also within the sites themselves. Over these years, we've been able to train and work with a lot of Southern African students, which is a great privilege and pleasure for us. And we have a very close relationship with the local community. Some of the people shown here are from the local community, and they're learning to excavate, and they assist us in our operations. They're integral in the work that we do. We've also developed a wonderful relationship with the East London Museum and its director, Kevin Cole. This is where we have a permanent lab and where we house all the collections. We have about, oh gosh, I think it's hundreds of thousands, I don't actually know the number, of plotted finds so far from the sites that we've worked in. So getting into some of the details of our findings, coupled with this rich, terrestrial environment that I showed you earlier, I've gridded bathymetry data from the Council for Geoscience, the Navy, and all available sources to get an idea of what to expect on this shelf. And from these data, and also just from general sort of knowledge of the area, we know that there are deeply incised canyons that impinge onto the shelf edge. There are paleo rivers associated with the modern rivers. There are faults like the Igorza fault that extend offshore that would obviously have an impact on the sort of characteristic of that environment. And there are also quite a few cemented paleo dune and paleo beach deposits, which are remnant ancient coastlines. Working out here, I must say, is extremely challenging. There are 800 kilometers between the harbors of Durban and East London. The sea is not kind. It's got a reputation. Of course, it's called the Wild Coast for no trivial reason. So collecting good high-resolution data is very hard. We've tried several times. We do have some new data, but it's taking quite a long time. So in 2011, I mentioned that we went out onto this coastline to explore, and it was actually probably the most fun field trip I've ever done. We were sponsored by the National Geographic Society to do the first reconnaissance survey, and we walked the entire coast from the Mpondoland River down to the northern part of Waterfall Bluff and up and into every single river valley by 7 kilometers. We surveyed both sides of each valley and the whole coast looking for rock shelters that contained archaeological sites. In total, at the end of a 5-week field survey, we documented 28 archaeological sites within rock shelters that have Middle Stone Age deposits or Stone Age deposits, and 5 open air sites. And none of these had been previously known about. We also took some hand cores on the Sauerfeld grass landscape to get an idea of the soil composition and maybe what drove these grasslands, because it's been argued whether they were natural or induced from pastoralists burning the landscape repeatedly. We also took geological samples for dating. So we found abundant rock shelters and open air sites, like I've already said. These are the kinds, this is the look of the landscape. It's absolutely beautiful. It's quite heavily uplifted, and we're trying to also figure out when that happened, and tying all of this into a tectonic seismicity story. Some of these river valleys have got so many rock shelters, like the one shown below. This is in the Mqweni. And all of these have got sandy floors and had occupation. Here's the first of the little videos. So the red dunes just north of the Msikaba River Valley have both early Stone Age and Middle Stone Age artifacts on this Paleosol surface. We've plotted and documented all of this, and we're hoping that we're going to find this transition from the early Stone Age into the Middle Stone Age, which would be something very unique. We've dated these dunes using luminescence dating, and they go back to 300,000 years. So this is the oldest site that we have in the area. The area we've done the most work in is at Waterfall Bluff, and this is the Mlaba Mkhulu, or big river. It's called the Mlaba Mkhulu River, and it drains into the ocean. You can see that the waterfall falls directly into the sea. And this is something quite unique about the Mpondoland coast, this uplifted character of it, and the plentiful rivers and waterfalls that result. This rock shelter is probably known to a lot of hikers, but what might not have been known is that it contained archaeological deposits. It is 80 meters long, 24 meters above sea level, which is a good height, considering that waves would not have charred out the deposits that are there. We've dated the record extensively. In fact, it's probably one of the best dated sequences so far in Southern Africa. And the records go back right to 37,000 years, which covers the last glacial maximum, which was exactly what we were hoping for. Throughout these layers of the stratigraphy, there are marine fish remains and shellfish present, which indicates this close reliance on the coast that we were somewhat, I suppose, expecting or hoping to find. One of my responsibilities, especially in the sites of all these rock shelters, is to look at micromorphology on sediment layers that make up the record. So we go back down layer by layer through the last glacial maximum and even beyond. And in order to study how these accumulated and sort of determine what happened, I take a trowel and cut into the side of the excavation. We use plaster of Paris to remove the block of the record. And then I soak it in resin. I buy resin from a yacht maker in Cape Town that's really clear and fluid and really nice. And then ultimately we cut thin sections through these profiles to study the very high resolution sedimentology. Zooming into some examples of what we see in these thin sections, it's a little bit different, of course, to rocks in thin section. And it's taking me a bit of time to understand all the anthropogenic things that we're coming across. But the contact between the two dominant stratigraphic aggregates is, we name the layers after people that work on the project and have been out to the site. So Courtney is one of the students that excavated. Kuka is one of our dogs that accompanies us every day when we're out there. So we see stone, bone, shell, this is shell, this is bone, charcoal, of course, layers of sediment. We see hearths and fireplaces, and all of the evidence of what people and natural erosional processes have left behind. The lithics in the sites, or the stone tools, are mostly dominated by hornfels, which is quite common on this landscape in the Karoo supergroup deposits just inland of the Msikaba formation. There's a lot of Karoo dolerites, and it intrudes the Karoo sequences that are made up mostly of mudstones, siltstones, and bakes, this hornfels. And this was seemingly the preferred stone tool raw material. It's quite different to what we find in the Cape. We're doing a pretty detailed study on these hornfels. We're looking at provenance. We've taken geochemical samples across the landscape. We're trying to see if people picked it up on the beach in the form of cobbles, or if they possibly went to primary sites to almost mine it. We didn't expect the preservation in this area to be very good when we first started working out there, because we thought that with this hot, humid environment, that things would probably be quite readily weathered. But that seems to not really be the case. These are botanical remains right through the record. They're fragments of leaves and bits of grass and all sorts of things that are actually fully preserved right back to 37,000 years. Irene is leading the work on this, but I'll just show one interesting aspect of what they found is that a lot of the charcoal in the site, a lot of the charcoal remains belongs to Artemisia, which is one of the most widely used medicinal plants right now in South Africa. It's used for treating all sorts of things like tuberculosis, malaria, coughs, colds, all sorts of stuff. So it's very interesting that it also occurred. It was also obviously something of choice in the past. The botanical team is working very closely with the local community in ethnographic studies, especially the ladies in the community, to find out which plants are used for what in that area. And interestingly, there are a lot of close correlations between the past and the present. We're really excited to show that we found 2 human teeth in the record, and they're right back in the last glacial maximum layers. This is pretty rare to find human remains in an archaeological site. Just quite fortuitously for me, they're in the layer called Hayley, but that's just totally coincidental. But these teeth, we've applied for a permit to do some work on them, some isotopic work on the teeth, and we're hoping to be able to find out exactly what these individuals were eating and how sort of what their foraging ranges were before they died. On that, I just wanted to show that in the Cape, the image on the left is from some work we did some years ago, where we made an Isoscape map or an isotope distribution map in the Cape area to try and figure out, to be able to fingerprint actual artifacts from sites to where they might have come from in a landscape, if that makes sense. And on the East Coast, archaeological records dating back to the last glacial maximum, which are already quite rare, suggest widespread movements of people at the time. By about 29,000 years ago, for example, sites in the Western Lesotho highlands that were quite, they were really sites of choice in sort of milder periods of climate. They were totally abandoned by 29,000 years ago, so leading into the last glacial maximum. Of course, in the highlands, you'd expect a stronger influence of these glacial cycles than on the coast. So we wondered, where did these people go? So we started an isotope study in this area too. And I went out in February and March and took much more. I took 400 samples from 137 locations in the landscape, right up to the, it didn't go into Lesotho, but the highlands of the Drakensberg and down to the coast, to start making an isoscape distribution for this area too. We're going to do, we're working up strontium for bioavailable strontium on the landscape. Although we're also running other isotopes, like lead, for example, to source the provenance of the Hornfels. So we're hoping that we can test specific things from archaeological sites and determine where they came from. My cat's assisted too, by the way. His name's Keith Richards, and John and Marilyn know him quite well. So 2 specific points of interest with the isotope work that we're going to get onto immediately is that we have in the Waterfall Bluff site, there are ostrich eggshell beads, and there are no ostriches that currently forage in this area or live in this area. So we think that they've been traded. Likewise, in the Lesotho Highlands and Sehonghong rock shelter, there's some vervet monkey remains, like vervet monkey scapular bone, and marine shell beads that clearly didn't come from there. So we're hoping that we can track maybe this exchange or the movement of actual people. And of course, the teeth will help too. Other geological work that I'm doing on the landscape is mapping out Quaternary deposits, which are very scarce. This is at Umgazi Rocks, at a place called Platbank. It's between the Umgazana and the Umgazi River. And it's one area where we've got a very good record of raised Quaternary deposits. So we're having these dated at the moment, and I think they probably go back to the last interglacial period, about 125,000 years. 125,000 years ago, when sea levels were about 6 meters higher than at present. This, of course, all feeds into what's onshore and what's offshore. And then additionally, emerging about 3,500 million years ago, microbialites or stromatolites appeared, of course, as the first sort of evidence of life on Earth. And these live on in suitable aquatic environments. some of the places, well, the one place where they're most famous is Shark Bay in Western Australia. But in fact, we've got them in quite a few locations in South Africa too. They were next found at Morgan Bay, and then in the Eastern Cape at Schoenmakers near PE. We've started to plot up a database of where we're describing and documenting these. And 3 of the sites are in our Mpondoland area too, the Mtentu, the Msikaba, and the Lupatana River mounts. These are the examples from Lupatana and Msikaba. And yeah, these microbialites or stromatolites are very good paleo environmental indicators. And they also, with the freshwater barrage pools that they're associated with, we think that they would have been a very good freshwater resource for people living on the early landscapes. We're doing a lot of work with raw material sourcing and surveying. I mentioned Hornfels already. In the top left is Mboiki, just south of the main beach, where there's quite a big Hornfels exposure in primary context. On the beaches and at the river mouths, there are a lot of these cobbles of Hornfels or Lydianites. That's very common on the east coast, those black pebbles. A lot of people skim them when they're quite flat. And they also cemented into some of these Cretaceous deposits along the coast. So we're testing the geochemistry of these Hornfelses and right up to the mountains that were sampled on the Isoscape work. And we're going to compare that to the actual stone tools in the archaeological site. I mentioned canyons earlier because those are very prominent on this coast. In fact, there are about 18 on the Mpondoland coast that we know of. And we went out and mapped these systems in May. We were on a vessel off this coast for about a week, collecting boomer sub-profiling data, sub-bottom profiling data. So canyons, submarine canyons are pretty ubiquitous worldwide. They're quite ubiquitous here too. And the paleo landscapes that would be associated with these are probably very similar to the coast that we see today along that area. So steep cliffs, waterfalls, big embayments, for example. I have a student called Hlanganani Shange who's working up the geology of these canyon head systems. And he's looking at the bathymetry that we've gridded, new boomer, and also deep seismic data from the Petroleum Agency to link to maybe turbidity flows and seismicity. So I mentioned we were at sea in May, and I haven't properly processed the data yet, but I just wanted to give you some examples. So this is the seabed, and there are clearly incised channels that extend out onto the shelf, very expected. At the canyon heads, this is the sort of morphology on a coast parallel profile. So pretty steep, deep canyons, just like the current coast. And the reason for this canyon investigation, it's actually not really part of the Mpondoland project, although it's in the same area. I've been suspecting for some time that they're probably coelacanths living in these canyons because they were discovered by Marjorie Courtney Latimer off East London in 1938, the first living or dead, but not extinct coelacanth. And then they've subsequently been found up off the northern KwaZulu-Natal coastline. So we're trying to sort of determine the habitats from a geological perspective as well along the Mpondoland coast. We had the privilege of working with the Angra Pequena, which is a lovely old sailing boat that's been converted into a research vessel owned by the Wild Oceans Trust, and Jean Harris is the captain. So another thing we've done in the area is for our bilateral German-South African rain project that extended over some years, and we worked in the Cape and we've worked all over the South African shelf. We were able to take some cores through sedimentary records on the shelf. And we've recently published a core record from the Mzimvubu River, which is at Port St. John's. What we see is it's into one of these canyons where there was sediment accumulated on the side. That's where we record. From the sea, from 600 meters depth at sea, this is the view looking back onto Port St. John's. So you can see how profound this narrow shelf and the close coast is. I know I keep going on about it, but it's completely different to what we know in the Cape. Some of the interesting things from this core record are we see enhanced erosion from about 1,500 years ago, possibly linked to pastoralists. We see humid conditions.
You can tell us a number, Annabelle.
Oi, I think somebody's unmuted. And we have maize pollen identified in the marine core, which is always a good indicator of agriculture. Another thing we keep looking out for, of course, on the seafloor are shipwrecks. They're very common in this region. The most famous one is probably the Waratah that was never found. I don't think it ever will be, because it possibly ended up down one of those big canyons, who knows. But there have been numerous searches funded by the author Clive Cussler to try and find the Waratah to sort of put this story to sleep. But yeah, there's the Grosvenor and Salbento. There's so many wrecks on that coast. So as we're mapping, we're just kind of keeping an eye out. Now I want to show you some of our website. We have a project website. If you search P5 project, you'll find it. And we have some, oh, there we go, it's working. We have some virtual tours that we've taken with panoramic photos. That one showed probably a gap dike. You can click around and take yourself into the field. They give a complete 360 view from different points on the landscape, shown by the red pins up here on the right. We walk every day from the Lupatana River to the Waterfall Bluff site. It's about 4 kilometers in each direction. And with these virtual tours, you could almost like take that walk yourself if you are so inclined. We also have, last year during lockdown, we made a little video series led by Eric, who, like I said in the beginning, is excellent at this sort of thing. He's really good at taking science and making it accessible to everyone and anyone. And he made a little series called Before Us, which we'll continue to build on. But we have 5 videos so far in this Before Us series, and each are about 15 minutes long. Something that we've really enjoyed doing is we worked with Jive Media to make some science Sparsa cartoons. And we've done one already, and we're busy with the second one now. Some examples of these are shown here on the left from other areas and other projects. But what we've done is we've made a cartoon about radiocarbon dating. So they follow a sort of a set recipe. You have a little bit of a storyboard. You explain how this works. You give an activity for kids to do, and it's aimed at sort of primary school to high school level. The intention is to get South African children, especially in rural areas, interested in the STEM subjects. There are various activities, and then we profile somebody. And in this case, we profiled a young lady that's working on some of our landscape dating from Itemba Labs. We have it in English and isiXhosa. We got somebody in the local community that we know who's a teacher in Lambazi to do the translations for us. And I have a PhD student called Ati Mfikili at NMU, Nelson Mandela University, who checked the translation from a scientific perspective. So we have a very cool team that's sort of, we want to roll out several of these if we can. So yeah, I'm sort of at the end of the presentation, and I just want to show you that we're a big group of people that work out there. The people in orange on the left are South Africans based at South African institutions. And then, of course, on the right, we always have a lot of acknowledgements, because something like this it takes a lot of logistics to get it right. So, like I said, we work closely with the Mpondo people, and especially the headman of Lambazi. We also have good relationships, of course, with the people that give permits to continue with the scientific work. Kevin Cole. We had a lot of initial discussions with John Costello and Catherine Costello and Greg Wertzer from the Council for Geoscience, who's done a lot of Cenozoic geology work on the East Coast in general. And we're funded, at the moment, we're funded by the US National Science Foundation. We have a grant to the 4 of us that was for 3 years, and this is the last year of that grant. So yeah, with that, I thank you. And we've published several papers, but we have more coming out. But we're quite focused at the moment on these little sort of videos and comics and other elements of our work compared to the traditional science. So thank you very much.
Nkosika, cool, Hayley. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk.
Hayley, I found it interesting that the coastline is so different from the other parts of Southern Cape. For instance, in our area, you talk about the upliftment and the waterfalls, etc.
It is. It's a fascinating coast. So the skinny continental shelf was carved that way when Gondwana broke apart. So that's a sheared margin, and the Falklands Plateau sort of sheared off and then down the Agulhas Falkland fracture zone. And it's the southern coast and the western margin are more passive margins where there was more of a sort of drift rather than a shearing action. But then subsequent to that, there's a lot of debates about when that uplift took place. The older work, such as by Tim Partridge and Rodney Moore, suggested that there were two phases of major uplift in the Miocene and then in the Pliocene. But subsequent studies have showed that it might be a slow, continuous uplift process, maybe driven by mantle plume activity or something. But actually, no one's really checked it out specifically there. It's always been near Durban or near PE. So we're doing some cosmogenic nuclide dating to try and see when those cliffs specifically have uplifted. And I feel like they might be, I think they might still be quite active. I mean, there are clusters of seismicity from our National Seismic Network at the Council for Geoscience around that region, which makes me think that there are maybe some active faults and some uplift going on. So yes, it's very unique in a South African context to have specifically that, and very young waterfalls. Those rivers haven't yet incised down to their base level. So I think it's very fascinating.
Thank you. Andrew Tanner has his hand up.
Yeah, I'll just say, Hayley, thank you very much. It's an area I know nothing about. The enthusiasm and the passion you have for it and the insights you've given to us were actually absolutely wonderful. So it's really inspiring, and the work you're doing and the encouraging to make it more accessible to younger people as well is fantastic. And the team you've got working for you to keep everybody busy and going. So, and the presentation was excellent. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that.
John Blaine.
Yeah, Hayley, that was really super. Gosh, I've not been to the Wild Coast very often, sadly, but I did spend a fair amount of working time around the Insizwa complex southwest of Kokstad. And really between Insizwa, Tonti, Tabankulu and that area, there's definitely evidence of a large-scale subvolcanic emplacement of those complexes. And we looked at that. As you know, there's some quite significant nickel mineralization associated with that area. And so there really was quite a hotspot. Sadly, we never found another Norilsk complex in that, but there were many indications there that at Ceres there was a major hotspot pretty close to that, and that complex is definitely related to that event. So around that area, which you covered with your landscape sampling, it would have been very interesting for the council to have done systematic stream sediment geochemistry on all of those to try and locate further occurrences of that nickel mineralization, which is quite limited but very, very rich in that area. So you can put that in your pie and bake it up and see what comes out.
Thanks, John. We still have, of course, those samples. So and a lot of them were from stream or alluvial plain areas. Thank you. That's a really good suggestion.
Tried to motivate back at that time, which was around 2000, or just before 2000, that in fact they do a systematic survey, helicopter supported, because they did a lot of those geochem surveys. It would have been an absolutely beautiful project for the population, the community in that part of the world to really generate some economic interest, because there's a lot more to be done in that area in terms of tracking down the source and other possible occurrences of that nickel mineralization in that area. Not that many people will like that idea, but most of it would be underground anyway, and that's all neat and tidy these days. But if you can motivate a story like that again, seeing as you're already working in that area, I think it would be great for that part of the world.
Thank you. That's an excellent suggestion. I hadn't even actually thought along those lines. So thank you for that. Yeah, but it's, I mean, the helicopter survey. No, I would actually really appreciate that. But the access is difficult. I mean, you mentioned a helicopter survey. So I did this by road, and wow, it took so long. And often the roads that you see on, for instance, Google Maps or satellite imagery, they either don't exist or you just can't get onto them with a car.
Yeah.
There's a lot of walking and parking, and it's very difficult, challenging to work out there.
Yeah. Interestingly, we did drill a couple of boreholes there, one of which was about 1,700 meters from the top of the Isiswa plateau through the complex down to the Eka. And that core is being stored with the Council for Geoscience or still at Rhodes University, probably, because Gunny Marsh did a lot of geochemical work on it.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to chat to you more about this. Thanks, John.
Okay.
Hayley, I saw that on your slides about the deep sea canyons and your survey of that. Are you contributing to this? Because I also recently saw a small clip on the small percentage of the ocean floor that's been mapped to date, and that's the big thing now. Are you guys contributing actively to that map? Are you in
Oh yes, we are. Yes. So the project is Seabed 2030, and it's being managed by GEBCO, the Global Map of the Oceans. We have given data to the project, and we're going to continue to do that. We think it's a great initiative, and we're trying to also cover more of our seafloor here too through our program that I lead at the Council for Geoscience. Actually, one of our former colleagues from our little marine team works in the GEBCO program now in New Hampshire, so we have a very good contact there. And also within all of this, under a bigger umbrella, from 2021, we're now into the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science. So this is the marine, anything in the ocean, especially from a geoscience point of view, has become, thankfully, very well recognized globally. And a lot of these sort of programs are burgeoning to demonstrate what we have out there. I mean, the seafloor is so poorly understood, as you know, and I've often said that in other presentations too, where we focus more on marine mapping. So yes, we are giving our data to the Seabed 2030, and we are part of that network.
How far offshore have you gone with your mapping so far?
So we work in different patches depending on where we're able to or where there's a need. So our current work that we're doing at the moment is off our own small boats in Table Bay, and we've almost finished the 1 in 50,000 sheet, the 3318 CD. It's the 50,000 sheet of Cape Town, the whole offshore section of that. We've also got so these boomer seismic profiles from the Mpondoland coast have contributed to our database. We've got a lot of work from around Durban, around parts of the Cape, Summit, Saldanha, Langebaan. We've got little patches of data, but through our ongoing program, we're trying to map within map sheets to make it neater and to be able to put things out. It's like we've actually, the first one we've published was from my work in Mossel Bay, where we've almost filled a 50,000 sheet. And that map has been completed. So yeah, it's a bit patchy. So we've finished Mossel Bay, we almost finished Cape Town. We've got bits of data from all over the coast, but normally on the continental shelf. So within sort of, I don't want to give a distance because it's different everywhere, but a depth of about 120 meters to the shore. And then at the Petroleum Agency, they've got a lot of data from the deep parts of our EEZ that have been contributed from research cruises and things like that. But we ourselves don't work out there because we don't have the equipment and the boats and all of that.
Any exciting finds that you've discovered, like wrecks or?
Oh yeah, Table Bay is full of shipwrecks. We found a very cool shipwreck just a few days ago. It's probably of the Gemsbok. That's our coverage within the 1 in 50,000 Cape Town sheet. The dark blue on the left is what we still have to do, but we've done most of it. And then on the right, there's zooming into some of our multi-beam data. You can see beautiful fabric of the Malmesbury. There are a lot of faults that we've mapped. There's also beautiful isoclinal folds. These are outcrops of granite near Llandudno. This is a funny structure that might be linked to faulting. And then on the right, there's the Gemsbok. It looks a bit funny and blocky, but that's the most recent shipwreck that we've recently found in the last few weeks. Yeah.
Thank you. What's the deepest you've actually gone down?
Me personally?
Yes.
I've been on research cruises to 5,000 meters. I've been on 3 German research cruises that have gone to the Agulhas Ridge, the Mozambique Ridge, and again to that sort of area, or the Agulhas Plateau, southern Mozambique Ridge. And the deepest depths that I've seen of the seafloor are 5,000 meters.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah. And also off Cape Town here, we went out on the Agulhas 2 some years ago to test a coring system. And we took a core from the Cape Canyon. And that was from about 2,000 meters depth. And when it came up and I pulled off the core cap, this really cold water flowed out onto my hand. And I was told that that's the Antarctic bottom water, which I thought was really amazing to actually touch that so tangibly. So yeah, we ourselves at the CGS, we don't have a vessel to go that far out, but we do certainly, when we have these opportunities, we do take part in research that goes further out to sea.
Thank you. Any other
Sure.
questions to Hayley? Okay, guys, thank you very, very much, Hayley, for educating us a little bit more and getting us all excited, and hope you get the necessary funding to carry this on for a long, long time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, everybody. Nice to see you again.